Cancer is defined as a non-communicable disease. It is caused by a cell which is a product of a mutation that divides extremely fast and quickly takes all over healthy cells and one or more of the body's organs, which can then cause these organs to fail. There are 4 stages of cancer, with stage 4 being the most extreme. There are many types of cancer as well, including lung, blood, and breast, just to name a few. It is defined as a multifactorial disease, which means a disease that can be caused by multiple factors. These factors could include poor life choices, exposure to radioactive material, exposure to UV rays, etc. Cancer dates back all the way to ancient times, with the first recorded case dating back to Egypt at around 1500 BC, where ancient documents discussed a tumor found in the breast, which would be considered breast cancer nowadays. Keep in mind that this is only the first recorded case. It is highly probable that cancer existed pre-Egyptian times and might have been responsible for killing a massive amount of early human beings. To better understand cancer's impacts, let's take the United States as an example to analyze how it has affected the country as well as the world as a whole. The American Cancer Society estimates that around 600,000 people will die of cancer in the United States in 2022. That's about 1,000 deaths from cancer alone. This means that cancer is the second largest killer, only just behind CVD. Chemotherapy is probably the most well-known form of cancer treatment. Chemotherapy is made up of mustard agents, which are known as cytotoxic agents. Cytotoxic means an agent that is toxic towards cells. When chemotherapy is administered into the body, it targets rapidly dividing cells. This is why cells like hair follicles are affected.
The United States is one of the leading countries in the world when it comes to GDP per capita, with around 60,000 nominal GDP. They are a modern advanced democracy, and depending on the state, it can vary between urban or rural. But overall, the United States is categorized as a mix of both. The US has a population of around 335 million as of September 2022. With around a 79-year life expectancy, the United States is notorious for its promotion of poor life choices. As of March 2020, the United States has a 39.8% prevalence in obesity in people around 20 to 39 years old. As of 20, nearly 13 of every 100 adults smoke. Due to its reliance on junk food and tobacco, along with a slew of other poor life choices such as nicotine addictions, opioid addictions, and more, on top of its pressing medical challenges, the U.S. is notorious for its reluctance to install free public healthcare system. Instead, private companies take the place of the government and charge exorbitant prices for basic healthcare needs. The Peter G. Peterson Association states that as of 2020, the national healthcare spending reached an astounding $4.1 trillion, which averages around $12,500 per person without proper insurance. And many citizens are forced to suffer diseases and injuries without any medical support. Many Americans with cancer have found themselves bankrupt due to abnormally high prices that come with cancer treatment, specifically chemotherapy. Chemotherapy is a treatment that provides an extreme economic burden on the people receiving the treatment, as without insurance, chemotherapy can cost upwards of $1 million US. And even with insurance, it usually costs from $48,000 up to around $100,000 per year. This takes most, if not all, of the average American salary. About 52% of chemotherapy cost is in the doctor's consultancy fees. Although this revolutionary treatment keeps the money going around and helping the economy, it creates a real burden on the people who need the treatment, as the treatment is really crippling to everyone's financial situation unless the person is already very well off in terms of money or has some sort of person they can rely on. Although cancer does financially cripple people, though, curing cancer and getting rid of it would negatively impact the economy, as the cancer market in America is extremely big at around $300 billion. And if this market disappeared, there would be a massive financial hole in America's medical economy.
Chemotherapy has saved thousands, if not millions, in the US alone. According to the American Cancer Society, when it comes to stage 4 lung cancer, chemotherapy alone decreases the mortality rate to around 25% in the US. Keep in mind that this data only relates to lung cancer. However, it still paints a picture for how effective chemotherapy can be when it comes to saving lives. It's no doubt that chemotherapy has mended families and has an overall positive effect on society. However, the effects on a singular patient may not be so great. Chemotherapy is absolutely not an easy process. There are many hurdles to pass when going through chemotherapy. For one, it can be extremely physically and emotionally taxing. Patients have reported feeling nauseous, drowsy, and overall very sickly between chemotherapy cycles. Not to mention the other side effects such as diarrhea, constipation, mouth sores, skin loss, and muscle sores. All this adds up to what can be a very uncomfortable and taxing process on the body. And in countries like the US, with its reluctance to install public health care, the price of chemotherapy alone is a huge downside for most people. There have been many examples of chemotherapy leaving families in major debt, and some might just prefer dying to cancer than to be left with the crippling debt that comes with chemotherapy or other treatments like it. Chemotherapy actually went back to when mustard gas was still an active weapon of war. Scientists were quick to notice how mustard gas affected bone marrow. They remarked how mustard gas hindered the bone marrow's ability to produce red and white blood cells. Scientists noticed how similar bone marrow was to cancer, in being both replicate rapidly, and started to experiment on how mustard agents could prevent cancer reproduction. Through this thinking process, scientists started to test a dumbed-down, less lethal version of mustard gas as a treatment for cancer. Despite the merciless and ruthless effects of mustard gas, these tests would then go on to be quite successful and, through trial and error, paved the way for chemotherapy as we know it today. In order for cancer to replicate, it must expose its DNA. This is where chemotherapy goes into action. When the cell opens in order to reproduce, chemotherapy flows through the opening and tears apart the cancer cells from the inside. Due to its rapidly multiplying nature, the cancer cells have less time to repair themselves, therefore making them easier to completely annihilate.
What is the process of chemotherapy? Well, first off, the patient will meet with an oncologist, a cancer specialist. They will create a schedule for the chemotherapy sessions, then the patient will give permission to continue with the treatment, and the medical team will inform the patient on how the foods and medicine will impact the chemotherapy drugs. Chemotherapy is administered usually by IV drip, capsule, liquid by mouth, or even cream that is applied to the skin, an injection, or a shot. Chemotherapy usually lasts between 3 to 6 months, but on rare occasions it can last upwards to even over a year. This varies due to the differences between people and also the stage of the cancer. Chemotherapy is broken into cycles of 1 to 4 weeks of rest due to its negative side effects, and doctors will usually prescribe drugs such as painkillers to help ease the pain that chemotherapy can induce. Some common side effects of chemotherapy are nausea, vomiting, loss of hair, weaker nails, extreme amounts of fatigue, and you are more prone to infections, as well as other things.
Chemotherapy commonly targets cells like hair follicles, which leads to baldness, and reproductive organs, which leads to infertility. This is because they are both rapidly dividing. Ever since its discovery and development by German scientist Paul Ehrlich in the early 1900s, chemotherapy has no doubt been successful. However, in light of its massive success, chemotherapy is ultimately only a dent in the massive medical challenge that is cancer. Chemotherapy is not a perfect cure and is not 100% foolproof. Rather, it only slows down cancer and on the off chance, outright kills it. Not to mention its physical and psychological effects on its patients. Chemotherapy has left its patients socially withdrawn and bedridden due to its rigorous schedule and negative side effects. In the future, in order to increase its potency, scientists must continue to work to make chemotherapy as effective as possible. This can be done by making chemotherapy more accessible. In the future, we will see rise of chemotherapy being administered through less intrusive forms, such as pills. When scientists eventually develop the cure for cancer, chemotherapy will start to become more supplementary and only serve to help the primary cure.
Chemotherapy does contribute both to the economy and the national debt of the US. Although it does help the economy more than it does create the national debt, The individual burden of chemotherapy is extreme due to the fact that chemotherapy is both an uber expensive treatment and an extremely physically exhausting treatment as well. The effect can create a lot of unemployment and destroy people's mental health. This is bad because if they become unemployed, they can't provide to the economy.
Scientists must continue to work towards making chemotherapy a more efficient and effective process. Due to its intense effects on the body and the mind, patients have reported becoming withdrawn from society as well as the body becoming permanently scarred physically, not to mention the massive financial burden which comes with cancer treatment. In conclusion, while effective, chemotherapy must continue to be streamlined and made more accessible, possibly through administration through pills and other less intrusive forms. And if the United States wants to make chemotherapy less of a financial burden, they should look towards installing a healthcare relief fund for treatments, or at least make all insurance companies liable to pay.
Because chemotherapy usually leaves people unfit to do work, conditions of housing, food, and other things may just go down the drain. The burden of the treatment on the body can leave people unemployed as the employers do not see the person fit for work anymore. This is a hindrance and also bad for the economy because unemployment also means the person contributes less to the economy. This is especially prominent in the United States, where supporting yourself by working is crucial due to the lack of governments putting the safety net. Overall, chemotherapy does help the economy develop, but there are still areas to improve, such as the massive financial burden that comes with the treatment, as well as the physical one, which leaves people unable to work.